Lori, and welcome to the channel. In today's episode, I want to walk you through two really quick edits that you can make on some summer flower images using some tools here in Photoshop. So we are going to create a gorgeous dancing flower with some added visual interest and weight. And then we're going to jump over and work on this image where we also added some visual interest and movement. All right, so let's jump in and get started. These are really quick edits, but I think make a big impact to the image. So when I shot this flower, I thought about doing a multiple exposure. It really, to me, looked like a dancing flower, but I didn't do it in camera. So I want to come in now in Photoshop and create that dancing movement look to this beautiful little flower. As I looked at the image, I also felt like it needed some additional visual weight down here in the bottom. So I'm going to use some tools here in Photoshop to just increase the flower power down here in the bottom corner and give it a little more weight and interest so that it really curves and hugs the dancing flower and gets us that final look. All right, so to get started, you're going to be surprised at how quick and easy this is. We're going to duplicate our background layer. Next, we want to reduce the opacity of this layer. We want to be able to see it as we move it around. Next, we're going to do a transform. So Command T, and then I'm just going to move the layer just a little bit. You can shift it in whatever direction you want to give that shadow effect. So for this example, I want to just make it move a little bit to the right. You can also use your arrow keys if you just want to get a little bit of that shift. And you can decide kind of where you want to place it and how much. So it's really up to you. We could also, you could come down with it. We want to create that effect. And I think for this image, I like taking it over to the right just a little bit. Let me see if I can get it just right. I think just a little bit of that shadow effect is going to be perfect. Okay, so then click the checkbox to transform that. And then the next step is going to be, we can continue to modify our opacity. So if you want it to be a little softer, you can just lower that opacity down. And then next I want to add a layer mask. So for this image, I wanted to mask off, and I'm going to do it at 100% the center of the flower. So I want to bring back that detail, and then just going to kind of mask a little bit there. And then I do want to mask the water drop. So I'm just going to come in just a little bit, still leave that shadow, but bring back the detail in the water drop. All right, so that's all there is to it. Now you could reduce the opacity of your brush, and you could bring back some details and soften the shadow look if you wanted to make it even softer. So it's really a preference up to you and your vision for the image. All right, so the next step, let's go ahead and check this side here. So I do have just a little bit of a line. So you want to check where you've transformed, and we can just mask that off. All right, so the next step for this image in my vision was to add a little bit of visual weight. And to do that, I'm going to add a transparent layer, and we're going to use the clone tool. Now I'm going to start with an opacity at about 50%. And all I'm going to do is come in, click the Option key, grab my target, and then I am just going to paste in some of this color and texture. And I'm just going to start moving around, continuing to move up and select, and just adding in some of this color and detail. Let's kind of think about placement. And again, keeping that opacity low is going to give it that really soft look that I'm wanting to achieve. And so we're just going to kind of duplicate all of this, bringing it around and down, and just creating almost like a really soft painting look with the colors and the texture that were in our original. I'm going to add a little bit more weight right there. And then I'm going to click this one and kind of fill in this green spot a little bit. And then you can also target right here. And I'm just going to kind of curve this around. Let's click it again. Just adding that that weight. And then you can change your opacity to bring more of the details out. So if you wanted to add a little bit more, you have that one right there. And maybe come in, just kind of have to play with it and see what you like. I think I'm going to take the opacity down a little bit lower and just grab a little bit of that yellow and pop that one right there. So keeping your opacity low is going to give you that visual weight. And we can even come in, let me click one more, and I'm going to add just a touch down there at the bottom to kind of softly curve that around. Now this area right here is still a little bit, it's less blurry. So I'm just going to grab one of these and kind of plop it on here to just soften that edge a little bit. There we go. Now at this point, if you don't like that little seed pod right there, we could blur it. You could also crop the image. I feel like my eye goes from the center over to this edge. So one thing we could do is come in and just crop that out, or you could even blur it a little bit if that's bothering you. So I think the more I look at the image, I don't know that that was necessary in it. So I think it's softer keeping that little seed head out. All right, so that is it, you guys. Just a really simple, taking a standard kind of snapshot and adding some shadow effect and doing some additional painting. All right, let's jump over to this next image. So this is a clematis seed pod and or seed head that forms after they bloom. And I just love all of the swirl and the movement. And I thought it would be really fun to take this image and do a little extra blur with it. So what I did is I went in, duplicated the background layer, but then I did a radial blur to add that softness and then apply a little bit of a mask. So let's walk through it together for those of you that maybe haven't used radial blur before. So I'm going to duplicate the background layer. And now we want to go up. I'm going to put on my brush tool. I want to go up to filter, blur, and radial blur. Radial blur can be really fun to add a little bit of movement. So you have two options here, spin and zoom. And zoom can be a fun option. It kind of makes things look like a firework coming out at you. But for this image, I want to do spin, and I'm going to start around 40. Now, let me backtrack for just a second. Something important to note is when you duplicate your layer, you can right click and convert to a smart object. So I don't always do it, but I highly encourage you to, and I'll show you why. So let's convert to a smart object. Now let's go back to filter, blur, and let's do that radial blur. And I'll show you why smart object was so important in just a second. So again, we're going to do spin. We're going to start around 38 to 40, click OK, and we will see the beautiful blur get created. It's going to process, and we'll see the smart object. Now, the benefit of a smart object is you can see it creates your mask, but it also creates this radial blur. And the benefit is we can click on that and it reopens the blur menu. So we could make changes. We could reduce the amount of blur, we can increase it. So you have those options as long as you make your layer a smart object. So be sure you do that. Again, old habits. I did not learn Photoshop when they had that option, and it's really a great tool. So it's really good to remember to do that. All right, so now what I want to do is reduce the opacity. So we're going to bring that opacity down so that we have a little bit of motion, but we still see the detail. And then I'm going to go to the mask. We've got our brush, and let's start with our opacity about 50%. And I want to just bring back the details, a little bit of detail in the center and around. And then let's raise it to 100% and just bring out that water drop and the center for a little bit of fun. So I just love the effect that this provided. This image was shot with just a really small aperture, so there's only detail right here in the center. So all I'm doing is accentuating, making the blur even more beautiful than what was shot in camera. Now, one last effect that we can do is an effect that I love to add. So at this point, we're going to do a stamped layer, Command Option Shift and the letter E. So we've got a nice clean layer to work with. Now I'm going to go to Filter, Liquify. So this is a fun way to add some additional detail to your water drops. Now there's an option for twirl. There's also bloat. So for bloat, we could come in, and let me zoom in for you guys. We can make this water drop a little bit bigger. So we could bloat it if we wanted. And then the twirl feature is really fun to do in a water drop where maybe you have some detail, but you want to just make it look a little bit more interesting. So I'm just going to twirl that just a tiny bit because I've got the reflection of a flower that was above coming through. Looks like a leaf. So I'm just going to accentuate that a little bit. And then you click OK. And now we've got that twirl. Now what I can do is apply a mask, and with my brush, I can come in and reduce the opacity of that. I could decide how much of it I wanted. So I can come in, maybe smooth out those edges. Let's take the opacity all the way up, make that water drop back round, but leave the detail in the center. So maybe I leave that little fun detail, and then you've got the bloat right there. You can see if I mask it off, or I can bring that back. And then another thing that's fun to do with your water drops is we could also actually add some color. So I'm going to add a transparent layer. I'm going to go to the eyedropper. I'm going to select this light green color, go to the brush, and we're going to start at a really low opacity. And I'm just going to pop in a little bit of that green right there in the water drop. And I'm going to brush in some of the green. Let's take the opacity up a little bit. There we go. Just popping in a little more green right there in our water drop if you wanted to. So that is an option as well. So this was, let's get rid of that paint. This was the before. This is with the twirl. So you can see just adding a little bit of some detail in that water drop versus that harsh reflection. And then this is with the paint. The paint is very, very subtle. And you could even just add paint to your water drop, which brings a little bit more cohesiveness to your image. You could even brighten the water drop. So just some fun things to do for a little bit of creativity. But I really, really love the blur effect on this image and doing that radial blur. I do think softening this water drop does make an impact, even if you just add a little bit of paint. All right, everyone, thanks so much for watching today. I hope you enjoyed just a couple quick ways to edit some summer images and have some fun in Photoshop. These edits took less than 5 minutes, and I think the impact, though, is really, really strong and fun. So thanks so much for watching. Please click like and subscribe, and let me know what videos you'd like me to create next. I'm always open to your suggestions. Thanks, everybody.